This video is going to be about mines of the New World, and I am finding mines very fascinating of late. This is just an incredible topic that I think, again, all the main information of has been lost. How did these all get there? Is it all just a natural process like they say, and this Earth is just formed from space and all that nonsense? Or is there something different that we're all missing? I am of the firm believer that this whole world was created by a master engineer, an architect of perfection, everything. And then we've been around in our times, in the last 1,000 or so years of our history, to basically kind of do the work or the bidding of some other force or entity to just basically be workers. And that in the past, the history that's been erased led to a really beautiful realization, or was of a world that was perfect, a world where mines were filled with all different kinds of things. There were probably underground worlds, underground cities, underground palaces, underground things. All the water was pristine, all the gems were just there where the creator put them, and so much more. Is it a sign of Lemuria and ancient civilizations that did work underground, lived underground, created all these crystals, all these gems, all this gold from something there? Has the civilization just been water, been adding to this world, or receding over time, and at one point everything was built? How many different groups of species have conquered and civilized this world? Are they all just human? Were they giants? Everything. So much to do, because we feel like we are the workers here. We are a little less than what was capable of creating some of these majesties, and these people had to learn all these mining techniques from somewhere. They didn't just all of a sudden have all these mines and have all these metals and able to make these cathedrals. There has to be a history of all this stuff that predates everything, where they figured out all this, where they solved all these problems. There's so much missing. I'm kind of looking at history from all different perspectives, and I believe this trio of videos with the fountains, the mines, and Florida in general, and much more, just all kind of relate in some way, just showing that this world was at one point some form of creation, some immaculate thing, with all these useful chemicals, all these things that we can put to use, these gems, these fuels, these liquids, these waters, all things that benefit the human being and the life upon this planet. So there is a divine essence to all of this here, and I hope you all can feel it as well and sense it, because I know that there's something innate that we're missing, and I hope we all can dig it up together. So this book, The World Survey, The Famous Voyages and Travels of Vincent Leblanc of Versailles, is just awesome, or Marseille, sorry, and he is just great. So I'm going to read another chapter from this, because there's some cool insight here that I'd never heard of before, never even fathomed before, and I wanted to share it here. So enjoy the pics, the art of all this stuff, and take a look at this book, definitely. But here is this chapter, and I'll discuss more at the end. Let's go. Chapter 12, 382, The Mines of the New World. Amongst other rarities and riches, the New World produces mines of gold and silver, pearls and precious stones in diverse places, and chiefly in New Spain and Peru, which of all parts of the world are most indulged with these advantages of nature, though other parts of Asia and Africa have them in some abundance, and Europe likewise, but it appears America had the principal and better portion, as well in these as other dowries, as I have before mentioned. Even just thinking them as dowries and precious treasures of nature, all of that is just in itself excellent. So in diverse islands they find most wealthy mines, as in Hispaniola, Cuba, and the rest upon the Great Gulf. Again in Carabana, Varana, Castile of gold, the country of Dorado, of Estramador. In New Spain there are these of silver, Paxuco, Tasco, Zupango, Guanata, Tamazlan, and other places in Acapulco. So these places were just beaming with gold and silver. And why? Some mythologies talk about the blood of the gods and the giants as being gold. And I wonder if if they're revealing something in there, or what these come from. But they definitely come from something that we don't know. Here we go. At the gold and silver mines they coin not for want of artist, or artifice, but they cut pieces in gobbets, whereon they mark the price from 1 real to 8, and so send them to Spain. The mines belong to merchants who give so much to the king, some 4, some 5 per centum. For want of men that can and will work, they get the metal with much difficulty, being the toil wherein the Spaniards have spent the lives of so many thousands, nay millions, of miserable Indians. So again, that shows that, there's the one species always kind of dominate, like even if it's humans, the one kind of power hungry freaks always tend to dominate those that they feel are inferior. And how many times has this happened? Are we still the ones being played with? The mines are exceeding deep, where the workmen are much inconvenienced with water, and with damps that poison them. Few free men will venture themselves, and the meanest slave hath his 3 crowns a day, who are often buried under the falls of the mine, so as by this means by degrees the generation of the Indians will be in short time totally consumed, who are constrained to undergo the work to get their livelihood. How good Christians forever they are, and to speak uprightly, looking on the insatiable avarice of the Spaniard, and the misery these mines put them to. 'Tis hard to judge who is the better, the slaves or the natives. For the slaves, for 800 or 1,000 crowns, may redeem themselves again. The extreme colds they meet with at the bottom often strikes them dead, having little or no wine to relieve them, being a barren country, in the least glass of wine at the price of a real. I'm just going to chime in here about that, being that how they say you go lower and how colder it gets. Whereas nowadays they say the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. So I wonder what that is all about. And I'm sure the places are different, but here we go. A barren country in the least of grants, the price of a real, the smallest money they have amongst them, where they use not to stamp any demi-reals. If a man will live but with moderation, his wine will stand him in 1 crown a day, which cuts their gains the shorter. They pay dear for apparel, and principally for shoes, which rot with continually standing in water. They have the better of it that work at the mouth of the mine, for they hand the materials from one to another, and so have the benefit to see the daylight, whereas they below see not but by candlelight. The depth is sometimes 1,000 or 2,000 steps, which are faced with boards or leather, or 'twere impossible to endure it. But again, 'tis much more inconvenient to one that is not used to it, by reason of the air, that makes one vomit in extremity, as I experienced going in one day, though I had travailed all the seas in the universe without the least motion sickness. Now the silver mine contains 4 separate veins, or vitas, as the Spaniards term them, of different stone, as they are likewise different metals, which run all from west to east, of not above 2 ells broad, and every vein is of several ores, as silver, brass, tin, and iron. The largest mine any merchant may purchase is of 80 ells, and no more, for which he hath the king's patent. There are some very small mines that are not above 4 ells, but they may sink down to the center if they can without encroaching on his neighbor. And if it happen that one makes the least incision beyond the direct line, mining upon another, he loses all he hath by confiscation. Jeez. In the Veda, or vein of silver, there are 78 mines belonging to several masters, except some one hath rented several. The tin mine hath 24 masters, every one his particular mine. They go less and less, according to the quality of the metal, as that of brass is less, iron less than that. There is a gate and good locks to every mine. They work by turns, otherwise they could never endure it. The air is so strong and pernicious. What a game of this is. It just using people, that the rich using the poor in the same slavery mentality as it really makes you wonder a lot about the past and why they were just going so nuts into these mines and all over the place, They were everywhere. The silver mine may be 150 ells deep, toilsome to the laborers, especially the slaves, whose backs are loaded with silver and their legs with iron. When a mine yields 5 for 100, 'tis sufficient. And also keep in mind that how they said the distances of the candles can be some 2,000 steps apart. There's a salt mine that you'll see in the pictures later in Poland, and they brag about having 800 steps. There are so many underground worlds that are definitely controlled and forbidden for us to go in, but someone is definitely exploiting them, and God knows if there's even a civilization or a whole government down there. I would not be surprised. Great art is required to direct the mind. Sometimes they can neither find men nor mind, being all for want of good direction, overwhelmed, wherefore geometry is very necessary. Silver generally lies betwixt two rocks or mountains, the one very soft, the other as hard, and ever in the very middle. There are several sorts of it. The finest is called casilla by the Spaniards, by the Indians tecana, of amber color, the other more black, and there is of other colors. I took all to be the same, perceiving nothing of silver in any stone, but the workmen know it perfectly. The ore they carry to little furnaces to be refined. When the stone is good, 100 weight yields 50 pieces of 8, some not above 30, nay 5, but the richest of all, 200 and above. There is not a mine but hath belonging to it at least 4,000 of these little furnaces, some 5 or 6,000 as that at Caractacus and Potosi. You would think you saw an army of the bellow blowers. And if you've seen any of John Levy's videos lately, he finds a lot of these in the Midwest, in the middle of America. I bet they were all over the place, connected to the mines, and for purposes just like this, and other purposes we can't even fathom. They have one mine of quicksilver, the heat whereof emits a most pernicious vapor that destroys them all, makes them lose their teeth, and often their senses and understanding. Staying by it by a bit of a quarter of an hour, I was almost stupefied to a stone, and the rest likewise that were with me, and had something worse, if notice had not been given to us. They get an earth they call azag, which melted yields quicksilver, with which they use to purify the silver, and have it likewise from Spain, where there is a mine near Seville. For this at Cadaquera will not suffice. The silver being fined and made money, they carry it upon a sheep to the seaside to ship it for Spain. The fining of it is troublesome, for often it must pass the fire 7 or 8 times. Interesting. They bring to Spain every year 12 or 13 millions, more or less, whereof the fifth comes to the king, the rest to the masters. There was one in few years got 200,000 crowns and more for his share, and when he died, had not a sheet to bury him in. Of gold there is several sorts, the popitas, or goblets, or grains of gold, absolute gold, pure and neat, without mixture, wanting neither furnace nor melting, ready for the stamp, being perfect by nature. The massiest I ever saw was but of 3 pounds, yet 'twas presented to the Spanish king for 20 pounds. Out of the mounts of Libani in Cuba, there was a one taken weighing 3,310 weighs, each weigh worth 14 or 15 reals, which with infinite other riches was cast away at sea, going for Spain. Wow, so the things at the bottom of the ocean must be ridiculous. There is no silver comes pure from the mine except some small bit, with which they call capa de plata, pure silver. Another sort of gold inserted in stone of the mine, hard to be extracted, in breaking which stone one discerns little luster of gold, in some less and some none at all. The most delicate gold I ever saw was a stone transfixed as 'twere with prickles of gold, like a hedgehog, refulgent both within and without. This gold is the best and finest of all. Another sort is in seeds or powder, found in rivers. 'Tis pure, and needs pass but one fire. Such are found in the rivers of the isles of Barlaventa and in the Paraguay. The best gold is of Chila, Quito, and Granado. The mine of Carahuana in Peru and Valdivia in Chile, which is the most perfect, is of 23 carats and a half, as likewise in Varaca. Silver abounds in the rich mines of Potofi in the province of Charcas. Next, the mine of Porto, not far off, likewise very rich, but of little benefit for want of workmen, by reason of the unsound air and extreme cold, and water which drowns it, but in Potosi 'tis not so. In the time of Yugas, king of Peru, the mine of Porto was open and wrought in, but not that of Potosi, which was not discovered till the Spaniards' time. This is the richer and yields most. At the first they drew forth every week above 2,000 weighs or castillans, whereof the gain came to 40,000. They fish for pearl in the South Sea near Panama, and in the North Sea in divers places, as in the Isle of Margarita, towards the coast of Paria, where the oysters feed upon cubuca, and surname it so. There are very large and precious of them. I have seen one no bigger than a nut sold for 3,000 ducats. There are of a higher price. The master of the South Fishing assured me he saw one as big as an indifferent egg. There were 3 brought to Lisbon that paid a duty of 16,000 ducats to the king, as is to be seen in the register of contracts. There is a sort they call stars, another demi-stars, others cadanet as predria, aloset or minute pearls, and seed pearls, and those of greater price, quilates or carats. For this fishing they choose the best winded men, and such as can contain longest under water. At Barceloneta, Cuba, and Hispaniola, I have seen them stay 3/4 of an hour under water, and I was told they have had some have continued the whole hour. The general of Margarita keeps many of these men, who are slaves to him, called bouze, and are ready enough to pilfer the best and sell them, though 'tis forbidden upon life to buy them. The master must use all fair means to get them out of their hands with something else, otherwise they will sooner return them to the sea than let him have them, if he gave them not wine and good cheer. The Incas make no use of pearls, unwilling out of benignity to expose their subjects as to much danger, but the Spaniards are nothing so scrupulous. They make their poor slaves dive 10 or 12 fathom deep, or tear oysters from the rock, and to fortify their lungs for retention of breath, they keep them fasting and hold them to a diet. One was brought to the king, big as a pigeon's egg, valued at 14,000 ducats, by some at 100,000, and 'twas called a peregrina. The negro that extracted it from the oyster had his liberty for it, and the master was made Aguarzala of Panama. For emeralds, there is a mine in Mexico, at New Granado in Peru, near Manta in Puerto Viejo. I bought an excellent one of an Abyssinian merchant, which surpassed in hardness and luster any of Mexico and Peru. Being in company with a friend, he'd fired it of me, and I gave it to him but 2 days after. I perceived it broken upon his finger, whereat he much admired, and I told him the reason, which was he had had familiarity with a woman, but he was ashamed to acknowledge it, there being none but idolaters, which is a great bareness. Another time, being in an Indian town inhabited by the Spaniards, I had an emerald, which a lady, daughter to the Lalvadi or governor of the place, desired to buy. But on the morrow she sent for me, complaining I had sold her a broken stone, which I disavowed. At last I asked her if her husband were in town, and answering no, I whispered to her, smiling, she had then been kind to some friend, whereat she stood amazed, and in the end acknowledged the truth, taking me to be skilled in divination. The like happened another time to another friend of mine, who acknowledged the like truth, for such is the virtue of this stone, if it be good and fine, and of the old mine. There are very fair ones, and of great price. Did not the plenty of them make them less esteemed? I once saw one weighed 4 ounces, sold for 6,000 reals. The emerald incorporated within a rock is like the metal contained, and while 'tis imperfect, the rock will be veined with green and white. In opening the rock, the emerald lies there imperfect, of the color of the rock, green and whites, so as to have it come to maturity. They leave it there till nature brings it to perfection, and go dig another place for riper. The Mexicans had a custom to pierce the nose and chin of their idols, to put emeralds in them. One of their kings himself had his nose so bored and adorned with an emerald, and from thence was surnamed Noseboard. This guy is a very interesting writer, and that is the chapter on the mines. And I just find it very interesting that, at this time, all of a sudden, there's this dominance of humanity, and they're just using other humans as just pure working force, a pure driving force in a absolute fury that has no care for the life or health of these people. So that means that they were paying some of the people, but a bunch of them were slaves and forced to do this stuff. So how did they gain the power What happened to these civilizations that seemed so pure, and why, why in Europe were all these civilizations so obsessing over this stuff and this valuable, these valuables, these golds, these metals, like putting all this value to it, doing everything to get it the same way they do now. These people that are in charge and ruining our world just do everything they can to get their hands on as much money and power as possible. They have no regard for the people that they feel are below them. And that's just the kind of mentality that happens. Whereas it seems like all these natives and the ones that were living purely with nature all seem to have like a better grip on what's important in life. And I mean, if they weren't forced to do anything, they wouldn't do any of these dangerous things for a medal. They wouldn't do like like there's some force that came by this pure perfect paradise of a world at one point and started to demand that these metals and these things were dug up at all costs, and these things were exploited, and the world should be dug, and all these things. And it just has me wondering. Mines, I find, are so interesting, like how they'll find tunnels that go so deep. You've seen a lot of those pictures that I put here, and there's so many more online. But all these places have these things that go really deep. And are those ancient living places? Were people living in these places at one point in time, or some form of species, maybe even a different type of human that didn't need sunlight, or different plants and animals that didn't need sunlight? There's just so much possibility in all this, and it just seems like so much is missing from the early time of when these things happened, when they started discovering these mines, when they realized they could take these mines out and extract them. And why were they just being used for beauty, or were they being used for something else at one point? It seems like all of these things had an ancient power. Just our water alone had a power. So could these crystals have all had something so much more? Because they can't just be something to look at and be beautiful color wise, and that would make them have such a value. It has to be something else. It's kind of like the way now, like, people are digging all over the place for fine metals and all these rare earth metals that they can use for amazingly profitable devices and electronics. There had to have been something back in the day more than just vanity and treasure and whatnot. And who knows? And what was the technology they were using? Why did they I'm really curious about the origins of everything. Step way earlier than history, way before any writing. How did all these things get here? Was it like how did the earth get constructed in such a way to have veins of different metals and different crystals compacting with just enough, air and water to form crystal caves and stalagmites and everything? It seems nuts. And the fact that we constantly find tunnels, constantly find mines that are abandoned, constantly look at the early history of America and all over the place, and you see people as old as young as 4 and 5 in the mines. It's that there's something different. And nowadays we don't have that. We don't have anything like that. I know we probably have some machines that do some of the extracting, but it's a lot different. It's just a lot different. So much has changed, and I don't know what to say besides that. But this world, I really feel, is a crafted masterpiece. Every level of it. And it's always funny how they tell you they've got all these diagrams of the inner core of the earth, all this stuff, but no mining company has gone below like 20 miles or 30 miles or maybe even less. So everything is speculation. They know nothing. They're telling us nothing. They may know something, but they are telling us nothing. And I think so many things that we just take for granted, so many things that were passed on from the older generations, so many explanations for massive things that can be explained in a sentence, are totally wrong. We have to combat the unbearable propaganda that weighs down on us and makes us even just completely belittle any type of imaginative idea towards our past that goes against the grain. We need to, whereas I think those ideas that would normally be belittled by historians and whatnot are the path that we need to take, because there's so many gaps, there's so many things that historians ignore, so many things that they leave out strategically, and there are so many things that we can see with the evidence that's left over, and we can use our imaginations and minds to think about that just don't make any sense. So Add your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you all think about minds. How are they created? The veins, is this all a living being that we're on? Like, what is this place? There is some mystery here that is so massive that so many people are missing it. But if you can cue them in to the fact that there is something far beyond what we've been taught, then that's the first step. Everybody needs to have that realization, whether it's the flat earth or Tartaria or the myriad of other realizations that one must come to in this modern nonsense world. We all have to come to them. We have to spread them far and wide, get people thinking, and therefore everyone will start to trigger their grandparents' stories and their, oh, I found this in my... Everyone will start to connect the dots, and that's when we will make some true progress in this path towards rediscovering our true and lost and stolen history, which is far superior than the nonsense we've been fed. So let's get to the bottom of it. Let's find our divine origins and keep the theories and awesome thoughts coming. Bless you all.